Adana stared into the mirror, her own reflection staring back, but it didn't move as she did. It smiled, wicked and slow, even as her face remained frozen in horror. "You wanted my help," the reflection said, its voice dripping with disdain. "Now you regret it?" The room grew icy, frost creeping along the edges of the mirror. Adana tried to look away, but the reflection's glowing eyes held her captive. "There is no turning back," it hissed. The kingdom of Nyandra buzzed with anticipation. Prince Kwame, the beloved heir to the throne, was finally seeking a bride. From the highlands to the coastal villages, the royal decree had been heard. Any woman of noble blood was welcome to compete for the prince's hand. The announcement filled many hearts with hope, but none burned brighter, or darker, than that of Lady Adana. Adana was known for her beauty, but her heart was as cold as the mountain winds. She had grown up hearing that she was destined for greatness, but her pride had been wounded when the prince barely noticed her at court gatherings. This time she vowed she would not be ignored. On the first day of the royal selection, Adana stood among the other noblewomen in the palace courtyard, adorned in a glittering gown of emerald silk. The prince entered, his presence commanding, but his eyes fell upon someone else. Standing at the edge of the gathering was a modest young woman named Zola, the daughter of a court herbalist. She had no fine dress, no jewels, but her quiet grace and luminous smile caught Kwame's attention. Adana's envy flared as she watched the prince approach Zola, speaking to her with a warmth he had not shown anyone else. That night, Adana locked herself in her chambers, consumed by rage. She refused to let Zola, a commoner by her standards, stand in her way. She paced back and forth until her eyes fell on a book she had stolen from the palace library years ago, The Secrets of Shadows. It was an ancient text that spoke of forbidden magic, the kind that could manipulate fate itself. Adana lit a single candle and opened the book. She whispered the incantation, calling upon the spirits of the night to aid her in her quest for power. The room grew cold, the flame flickered, and from the corners of the chamber, a shadow began to take shape. The shadow stretched and twisted until it formed an exact replica of Adana, identical in appearance but with glowing red eyes. "You summoned me," it said in a voice that echoed like wind through a cavern. "Yes," Adana replied, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want you to replace me in the competition. Win the prince's heart and ensure that no one, especially Zola, stands in our way." The shadow bride smiled, a chilling curve of its lips. "As you wish." The shadow turned and walked to the window. As it stepped into the moonlight, it melted into darkness, disappearing into the night. The air grew still, and Adana shivered as she realized she had set something far more dangerous into motion than she had imagined. The morning sun rose over Nyandra, and the palace buzzed with activity. The royal competition to select Prince Kwame's bride was in full swing. Women of noble blood paraded their talents in music, weaving, and debate, all hoping to catch the prince's eye. Among them was the shadow bride. Her movements were flawless, her words captivating, and her presence unervingly perfect. Dressed in a dazzling gown of black and silver, she outshone every other contestant. The prince was mesmerized, unable to take his eyes off her. But Zola, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt a chill every time the shadow bride spoke. There was something unnatural about her beauty, an air of danger that made Zola's instincts flare. Yet she couldn't voice her concerns. Who would believe her, the humble daughter of a herbalist, over a noblewoman like Adana? Throughout the day, the shadow bride charmed not only the prince but also the royal court. Even the queen, a sharp judge of character, seemed impressed by her poise. Zola watched from a distance, feeling the growing gap between herself and the prince. As the sun set, the palace held a grand feast to celebrate the first day of the competition. The prince, seated beside the shadow bride, laughed and talked with ease. Zola remained in the background, tending to her father, who had been invited as the royal herbalist. The feast ended, and the contestants were escorted to their chambers. Zola lingered in the courtyard, staring at the moonlit sky. A familiar voice startled her. "Why do you stay in the shadows, Zola?" It was Prince Kwame. He had slipped away from the festivities and found her alone. I didn't think you'd notice me, my prince," she replied, her voice soft but tinged with sadness. Kwame smiled. "I notice everything about you. You have a light that no one else in the palace possesses." Before Zola could respond, a cold wind swept through the courtyard. Both of them turned to see the shadow bride standing in the archway, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "I see I've interrupted," she said smoothly. "My apologies, Your Highness. I simply came to admire the beauty of the night." Kwame looked between Zola and the shadow bride, his expression conflicted. Perhaps we should all retire. The days ahead will be demanding. As they parted ways, Zola couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow bride had been watching her with more than polite curiosity. There was something deeply unsettling about her presence, but Zola didn't yet understand just how dangerous the shadow bride truly was. The days of the competition passed swiftly, and with each event, the shadow bride's charm seemed to grow. She excelled in every challenge, from crafting intricate beadwork to answering riddles posed by the court elders. Yet, for all her perfection, Prince Kwame couldn't ignore a nagging sense of unease. Late one evening, after the palace halls had quieted, Kwame sat alone in the royal garden. His mind replayed moments from the competition, small, strange occurrences. The shadow bride never seemed to tire or falter. Her laughter was melodic, but it lacked warmth. Even her touch, though delicate, left a strange chill in its wake. As Kwame pondered these thoughts, Zola appeared, carrying a basket of herbs. She hesitated when she saw him, but he waved her over. "You always seem to find peace here, my prince," she said, kneeling beside him. "And you always seem to find me when my mind is troubled," Kwame replied with a small smile. "Tell me, Zola, what do you think of Lady Adana?" Zola's hands paused over her herbs. She wanted to speak honestly but feared the consequences. "She is striking. But sometimes what we see on the surface does not reflect what lies beneath." Kwame raised an eyebrow. "You sense it too, don't you?" Zola met his gaze, startled. "Sense what, my prince?" "Something isn't right about her," Kwame admitted. "She is everything one could desire in a queen, yet she feels hollow." Before Zola could respond, a servant arrived, summoning the prince to the throne room. He sighed, rising to his feet. "We'll talk again soon, Zola." Zola watched him leave, her heart heavy. She had no proof of the shadow bride's true nature, but her instincts screamed that the prince was in danger. In the throne room, the shadow bride stood before the king and queen, her hands folded demurely. She recounted tales of her family's noble lineage, her voice enchanting everyone who listened. Kwame entered, observing her closely. As she spoke, the room seemed to dim slightly, as though the shadows themselves leaned closer. Kwame blinked, shaking off the thought. Was his imagination playing tricks on him? The queen turned to her son. "What do you think, Kwame? Lady Adana is exceptional, is she not?" Kwame hesitated, his unease growing. "She is impressive, mother. But the competition is not over." The shadow bride's lips curled into a soft smile, but her glowing eyes flickered briefly with something darker. That night, Adana sat alone in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She no longer saw herself. Her shadow bride had taken on a life of its own, and Adana felt powerless to stop it. When the shadow bride appeared in the mirror, Adana flinched. "You have nothing to fear," the shadow said, its voice as smooth as silk. "We are so close to winning the prince's heart. Soon he will be ours." Adana's voice trembled. "This wasn't what I wanted. You've gone too far." The shadow's smile faded. "You wanted power and I will give it to you. But remember, Adana, I am no longer just your creation. I am your better half." The shadow dissolved into the mirror, leaving Adana shaking with fear. At dawn, Zola's father, the court herbalist, entered the palace gardens. As he inspected the herbs growing there, his eyes widened in alarm. Several plants near the eastern wall were withered and blackened, their leaves crumbling to ash. He knelt, muttering a prayer under his breath. "Dark magic," he whispered. When Zola found him there, he turned to her with a grave expression. "Something unnatural has entered the palace. You must be careful, my child." Zola nodded, her resolve hardening. Whatever the shadow bride was, she would not allow it to harm the prince, or the kingdom. The palace awoke to a strange tension in the air. Rumors of illness had spread among the servants. Plants in the royal garden continued to wither, and the palace livestock had grown restless. While many dismissed these as mere coincidences, Zola and her father knew better. Meanwhile, Prince Kwame's unease deepened. Despite his doubts, he found himself drawn to the shadow bride. Her beauty was undeniable, her voice hypnotic, but something about her felt unnatural. He shared his concerns with no one but Zola, who continued to urge caution. In her chambers, Lady Adana sat in front of her mirror, trembling as the shadow bride emerged once more. "You've done enough," Adana said, her voice trembling. "You've won the prince's attention. You don't need to do anything more." The shadow bride tilted her head, her glowing red eyes narrowing. "You misunderstand, Adana. This is no longer about winning his affection. This is about power." Adana's heart raced. "Power?" That's not what I wanted. The shadow bride stepped closer, her form dark and fluid like smoke. You summon me, Adana, and I will not be dismissed. Soon the prince will belong to me. And so will this kingdom. Adana's protests were swallowed by the cold laughter of the shadow bride as she dissolved into darkness, leaving Adana alone and terrified. At the midday competition, the shadow bride continued to dazzle the court. She performed a traditional dance with such grace and precision that even the queen applauded. Yet Zola, standing at the edge of the crowd, noticed something chilling. As the shadow bride danced, her movements seemed to blur, her feet not quite touching the ground. Zola's father confirmed her fears later that evening. Whatever she is, she's not human. You must warn the prince. I can't, father, Zola said, her voice filled with frustration. He's under her spell. He won't believe me without proof. Her father handed her a pouch filled with protective herbs. Then gather proof. But be careful. Shadows can be deadly. That night, Prince Kwame found himself unable to sleep. His dreams had been plagued by strange images, a dark figure standing over him, a voice whispering promises of power and devotion. He woke with a start, the air in his chambers feeling thick and cold. Seeking solace, he wandered the palace halls. As he approached the shadow bride's chambers, he heard whispers coming from within. His hand froze on the door handle as he recognized Adana's voice, but it sounded frantic, almost pleading. You have to stop, Adana's voice said. You'll ruin everything. Another voice, colder and more sinister, replied. You should be grateful, Adana. Without me you're nothing. Kwame leaned closer, but before he could open the door, the whispers stopped. The silence was unnerving and a chill ran down his spine. He decided to leave, unsure of what he'd just overheard. The next morning, the competition continued with a test of intelligence. Contestants were tasked with solving riddles posed by the court elders. The shadow bride answered each one with ease, her voice smooth and confident. But when it came to Zola's turn to present her thoughts, the shadow bride's expression darkened. She whispered something under her breath, and a gust of wind swept through the hall, scattering Zola's carefully prepared notes. Despite the disruption, Zola stood firm and recited her answers from memory, earning applause from the elders. The shadow bride's fury was evident, though she masked it with a forced smile. Later that day, Zola approached Prince Kwame. My prince, I believe Lady Adana may not be who she seems. Kwame looked at her, startled. What do you mean? She carries a darkness with her, Zola said carefully. I can feel it. Please, my prince, be cautious. Kwame nodded slowly, his doubts aligning with Zola's words. I will watch her closely, Zola. Thank you for your honesty. That evening, the shadow bride stood on the palace balcony, gazing at the kingdom below. Her red eyes glowed faintly as she whispered to the night. Soon this will all be mine. Unbeknownst to her, Zola watched from the shadows, clutching her father's pouch of herbs. She had seen enough to confirm her suspicions. The time had come to uncover the truth about the shadow bride and protect the prince at all costs. The palace was alive with activity as the royal competition entered its final stages. Contestants were preparing for the next challenge, but an invisible tension lingered. Zola, now certain of the shadow bride's dark origins, sought guidance from her father, the herbalist. In the quiet of their chambers, Zola explained what she had witnessed. The shadow bride's unnatural movements, the whispers in her room and her chilling words on the balcony. Her father nodded gravely as he pored over his ancient texts. She is not human, he said finally. She is a shadow spirit, likely summoned through forbidden magic. Such beings feed on envy and thrive on chaos. If left unchecked, she could destroy everything. Zola's heart sank. How do we stop her? Her father handed her a small pouch of protective herbs. These will shield you from her magic, but to destroy her, you'll need to sever her connection to the one who summoned her. Lady Adana, Zola murmured, realizing the truth. Her father nodded. Confront her. She may have answers. Meanwhile, Prince Kwame continued to struggle with his doubts. The shadow bride had grown bolder in her advances, often finding ways to be alone with him. Though he was drawn to her, the unease in his heart grew stronger. One afternoon, as they strolled through the palace gardens, the shadow bride reached for his hand. Her touch sent a chill through him and he pulled away instinctively. You seem distracted, my prince, she said, her voice smooth but tinged with annoyance. Kwame hesitated, searching for the right words. I feel something is not as it seems, Lady Adana. The shadow bride's expression softened, but her eyes glowed faintly. You doubt me? No, Kwame said quickly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. I only need time to think. The shadow bride smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Take all the time you need, my prince. I am patient. As Kwame walked away, she watched him with a gaze so intense it felt like the very shadows around her deepened. Zola found Adana in the palace library pacing nervously. The once confident noblewoman now looked pale and frail, her eyes sunken with worry. Lady Adana, Zola called softly. Adana jumped, spinning to face her. What do you want? I know what you've done, Zola said, stepping closer. You summoned her. The shadow bride. Why? Adana's eyes filled with tears. You wouldn't understand. I was desperate. I needed him to see me, to love me. But now, she's out of control. Then help me stop her, Zola urged. Before it's too late. Adana shook her head, backing away. You don't know what she's capable of. If I try to stop her, she'll destroy me. She'll destroy all of us if you don't, Zola said firmly. Please, Lady Adana. You still have a chance to make this right. Adana hesitated, her fear battling her guilt. Finally, she whispered, meet me tonight in the East Wing. I'll show you how to end this. That night, Zola made her way to the East Wing, clutching the pouch of herbs her father had given her. The halls were eerily silent, the air heavy with foreboding. When she reached the designated room, she found Adana waiting, trembling with fear. There's a mirror, Adana said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's how I summoned her. If we break it, we might sever her connection to this world. Before Zola could respond, the room grew cold, and the shadows seemed to thicken. The shadow bride emerged from the darkness, her red eyes blazing with fury. You betray me, Adana? The shadow hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally. Adana fell to her knees, sobbing. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please forgive me. The shadow bride laughed, a chilling sound that filled the room. Forgive you? You created me, and now you will pay the price for your weakness. Zola stepped forward, holding the pouch of herbs in front of her like a shield. You won't harm anyone else. This ends now. The shadow bride turned her gaze on Zola, her form shifting and twisting like smoke. You think you can stop me, little girl? You are nothing. But as the herbs began to glow faintly in Zola's hands, the shadow bride faltered, her form flickering. Adana scrambled to her feet, clutching Zola's arm. The mirror, Adana gasped. We have to destroy it. Together, they ran toward the mirror on the far wall, the shadow bride screeching in rage behind them. In the end, they didn't reach the mirror. The shadow bride summoned a gust of wind that knocked both women to the ground. Zola clutched her herbs tightly, vowing to find another way. The palace trembled as the shadow bride unleashed her fury. Her red eyes burned brighter than ever as she loomed over Zola and Adana, her form twisting like a storm of smoke and fire. You dare to defy me? The shadow hissed, her voice echoing with unnatural power. Zola struggled to her feet, clutching the pouch of glowing herbs. You don't belong in this world. Go back to the darkness you came from. The shadow bride laughed, her voice chilling. You are brave, little herbalist's daughter, but bravery will not save you. Adana cowered behind Zola, tears streaming down her face. Please stop this. I never meant for any of this to happen. The shadow turned her gaze to Adana, her expression twisted with contempt. You summoned me because you were weak. Now you will suffer the consequences. Zola's father, alerted by the strange energy in the palace, burst into the room carrying a staff adorned with protective charms. Stay back, he shouted, slamming the staff into the ground. A ripple of light spread through the room, forcing the shadow bride to step back. You meddling old man, the shadow snarled, her form flickering. You cannot banish me. I am tied to this world by the one who summoned me. Zola's father turned to Adana. If you truly want to undo this, you must sever your connection to her. Destroy the mirror and she will lose her anchor. Adana's hands shook as she stared at the ornate mirror that had brought the shadow into her life. I can't. She'll kill me. Zola grabbed Adana's arm, her voice firm. If you don't, she'll destroy all of us. You have to be strong, Adana. Summoning her last ounce of courage, Adana stumbled toward the mirror. The shadow bride screamed, her form expanding to block Adana's path. Zola's father raised his staff again, sending another wave of light through the room, forcing the shadow back. Adana reached the mirror, her reflection warped and distorted by the shadow's presence. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the gilded frame. I gave you everything you wanted, the shadow said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Power. Beauty. The prince's attention. You can still have it all, just don't betray me. Adana closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I don't want it anymore. I just want this nightmare to end. With a cry, she raised her arm and smashed the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the shadow bride let out an ear-piercing scream. The room erupted in chaos as the shadow's form dissolved into wisps of smoke, swirling violently before disappearing into the cracks of the shattered mirror. The air grew still, the oppressive darkness lifting. Adana collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Zola knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over," Zola said softly. Adana looked up at her, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Zola nodded. "You made a mistake, but you also made it right. That's what matters now." The next morning, the palace began to heal from the events of the previous night. Servants cleaned the shattered glass, the withered plants in the garden began to recover, and the oppressive chill that had haunted the halls was gone. Prince Kwame, unaware of the full extent of what had occurred, sought out Zola. He found her in the garden, tending to a bed of flowers that had nearly died during the shadow bride's reign. "You were right," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "There was something wrong about her. I should have listened to you sooner." Zola looked at him, her expression kind but firm. "You listened when it mattered, my prince. That's what's important." Kwame hesitated, then reached for her hand. "Zola, I owe you my life, and my heart. You have shown me more courage and honesty than anyone I've ever known." Zola's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull her hand away. "My prince." He smiled. "Call me Kwame." The garden was silent except for the sound of birdsong, a symbol of the peace that had finally returned.
Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification if you enjoyed the story. Thank you for watching. See you next time.